The garage smelled of cold concrete and faint ozone. Marcus Hale stood over the relic like it had personally offended him. "That's scrap electronics," he said, voice dripping authority. "No value. Take a mop and get out." He had no idea the man he had just humiliated was the only reason the company still existed. What was hiding inside that silent rack? Daniel Reyes pushed the cleaning cart down the service corridor at 1:47 a.m., same as every night for the last 6 years. The wheels squeaked on the polished tile the way they always did. Most people at Hale Dynamics never noticed him. That was the point. He was 41, single father to a sharp-eyed 8-year-old named Lila, and he lived in a 2-bedroom rental on the edge of Industrial Park Drive. The paycheck covered rent, groceries, and the after-school program that kept her safe until he clocked out. No one at the firm knew he had once worn a different badge. Lead systems architect on a classified DARPA contract in 1998. No one knew he had designed the quantum-linked backbone that still quietly held the entire company together. Until 2 weeks earlier, when the core servers began their slow death spiral. Marcus had called it a temporary latency event. Investors called it a $2.4 million a day hemorrhage. The board called emergency meetings that solved nothing. Daniel had found the original 1972 prototype rack during a routine sweep of sublevel 3. It sat under a tarp in the far corner of the old test vault, exactly where he had left it 24 years ago. The same faded service tag, number 4471, still dangled from the upper rail. He had carried that tag in his wallet the entire time he was gone. Marcus discovered him there at 9:12 the next morning. The CEO had arrived in a charcoal Brioni suit and shoes so clean they reflected the overhead halogens. His Patek Philippe caught the light like a warning. 2 VPs and the head of cybersecurity trailed him like nervous dogs. Marcus looked at the open panel, at Daniel's gloved hands, at the ancient rack, and laughed once. A short, expensive sound. "That's scrap electronics. No value. Take a mop and get out." The VPs chuckled on cue. Daniel said nothing. He simply closed the panel, folded the tarp, and wheeled his cart away. But something in his chest had shifted. A debt long overdue had just been acknowledged. Day 1. The vault smelled of dust and old solder. Daniel pulled the tarp completely off at 11:52 p.m. Beneath it, the rack stood exactly as he remembered. Black anodized steel, hand-wired backplane, the faint scent of 1998 still clinging to the insulation. He set Lila's worn stuffed rabbit on the workbench so it could watch. She had insisted he carry it that morning when she hugged him at the door. Security blanket for both of them. With a $9 analog multimeter, he began to listen. Modern diagnostic suites had declared the system unrecoverable because they only measured against current tolerances. They had never met the 0.007 volt calibration pins Daniel had deliberately hidden in the original design. Pins that existed only in the mind of the man who built it. At 2:14 a.m., he found the first drift. A single qubit pathway off by 0.004 of a millisecond. He adjusted it with a jeweler's screwdriver older than Lila. The rack gave a soft click. Overhead lights on sublevel 2 flickered once, then steadied. Power restored to the east wing. No alarms. No logs. Daniel allowed himself one small exhale. Then he covered the rack again and went home to make Lila pancakes before school. The rabbit stayed warm in his jacket pocket the whole drive. Day 2. The outage worsened by morning. Marcus fired the first CTO at 10:03 a.m. in a glass-walled boardroom, while Daniel mopped the hallway outside. The sound of raised voices leaked through the frosted glass like static. Daniel kept his head down, kept pushing the buffer in slow, even passes. At 11:40 p.m., he returned to the vault. The rabbit watched from the workbench again. This time, the multimeter needle trembled on a secondary bus. He trimmed the resistance by 0.002 ohms. The faint ozone smell sharpened, then settled. A backup generator on floor 7 spun up without a single alert. Another invisible stitch in the failing machine. Day 3. Marcus stormed through the atrium at 8:17 a.m., Patek Philippe flashing under the recessed lights. He shouted at a cluster of consultants billing $450 an hour. The stock had already dropped another 4%. In the break room, he could be heard calling the backbone haunted. Daniel waited until the last executive elevator chimed at 11:37 p.m. Then he went back down. Night 3. Realigned the primary voltage bus. The scent of warm transformer oil filled the vault like a memory that refused to fade. The rabbit's ear flopped forward as if nodding approval. When Daniel finished, the East Wing HVAC units cycled back online with a low, satisfied hum. He folded the tarp exactly as he had found it. No one would ever know. He drove home at 3:22 a.m. Lila was still awake on the couch, Rabbit missing from her bed. She had waited. He made her hot chocolate at the tiny kitchen table and let her fall asleep against his shoulder while the city outside kept running on power he had just coaxed back from the dark. Day 4. The second CTO lasted exactly 9 hours. Marcus dismissed him at 4:51 p.m. in front of 3 investors on a live video feed. Daniel heard the raised voice echo down the service stairwell while he emptied trash bins on level 2. The humiliation from the vault still burned behind his eyes, quiet and steady. That night the vault felt colder. Daniel's hands moved with the same precision. He traced a corroded ground path that modern scanners had written off as obsolete. The multimeter hummed its thin metallic song. He cleaned the contact with a cotton swab dipped in isopropyl, then reseated the pin. The building's main trading floor lights steadied for the first time in 72 hours. No one upstairs thanked the janitor. They never did. Day 5. Marcus's voice cracked during the 9 a.m. all hands. He promised to fix by end of week. The hedge fund partners on the call did not look convinced. Daniel mopped the executive wing at 2:30 p.m., Rabbit in his pocket, listening to the frantic phone calls bleeding through closed doors. At 11:55 p.m., he descended again. The Rabbit sat in its usual spot. This time the drift was in the quantum entanglement buffer. He adjusted phase alignment by 0.01 radians. The rack responded with a sound like a sigh traveling through copper. Lights on the entire north face of the building came back without a single error code. He left at 3:08 a.m. Lila had left a note on the kitchen counter in purple crayon. "Daddy, don't forget the rabbit tomorrow." He pinned it to the fridge and stood there a long time, breathing in the quiet. Day 6. The third CTO was gone before lunch. Marcus paced the boardroom at 1:14 p.m., Brioni jacket unbuttoned for the first time anyone could remember. The daily bleed had reached 2.4 million again. Consultants were now billing 1.8 million total and delivering nothing. Daniel kept his rhythm. Mop. Buffer. He covered it at 2:41 a.m. On the drive home, the city lights looked a little less desperate. Lila was asleep when he walked in, but the Rabbit went back in her arms exactly where it belonged. Day 7. Marcus canceled the morning briefing. The silence in the building felt heavier than the outage itself. Daniel pushed his cart past the empty boardroom at 10:22 a.m. and saw the CEO alone at the head of the long table, staring at a dead screen. The Patek Philippe lay face down on the mahogany like something discarded. That night, Daniel rewrote the final segment of the original assembly language he had invented in 1998. The vault smelled of solder and memory. The Rabbit watched without blinking. When the last line compiled, the core timing stabilized by another critical margin. The system drew its first full breath in 11 days. Daniel did not smile. He simply logged nothing, left nothing behind, and went home before dawn. Day 8. The stock had fallen another 9% overnight. Marcus stood in the atrium at 7:50 a.m., surrounded by reporters asking the same question he could not answer. Daniel emptied the recycling bins 10 feet away and heard every word. The debt felt closer now. Not paid, but closer. He returned at midnight, carrying the Rabbit like a folded letter he refused to lose. Tonight, the fix was smaller, almost delicate, recalibrating a single optical isolator that had drifted 6 nanometers. The multimeter needle barely moved. The rack responded with a clean, perfect tone. Power flickered across 3 entire floors, then held. Lila called him at 6:30 p.m. the next evening while he was still on shift. She read her homework over the phone, voice small against the sound of the floor polisher. He listened between every pass, rabbit warm against his chest, counting down the nights until the machine either lived or died in front of everyone who had left. And the vault waited beneath them all, counting with him. Day 9. The server room hummed with a new uncertainty. At 1:17 a.m., Daniel's flashlight beam danced across the raised floor tiles, catching the faint dust that had settled since the last outage. Marcus had posted extra security after the power flicker the night before. 2 guards now, patrolling the sub-basement corridor every 40 minutes. Daniel timed his movements to their footsteps, the rabbit tucked inside his janitor's vest like a folded letter he refused to lose. He knelt beside the auxiliary cooling loop, the one everyone had written off as redundant. The temperature gauge read 41.3 degrees Celsius, 3 degrees past safe. A single misstep here would trip the thermal cascade and wake the entire monitoring grid. He exhaled once, slowly, the scent of warm circuit boards filling his lungs, and slid the access panel free. His fingers found the corroded valve he had installed himself back in '98, back when this building was still just a blueprint on his drafting table. 1 quarter turn. The hiss was soft, almost intimate. Coolant pressure dropped, stabilized, then climbed back into green. The rack lights shifted from amber to steady blue. No alarms. No logs. He sealed it again at 1:44 a.m. and was pushing his cart past the guards before they finished their coffee. By 8:05 a.m., the traders on the 9th floor were whispering about the unexplained stability. Marcus canceled another press conference. The Patek stayed in his pocket today, hidden, as if even the watch understood the shame of being seen. Daniel swept the executive lounge at 10:12 a.m., the vacuum's low growl masking the tremor in his hands. A junior analyst dropped a report beside him. Page 47 showed a projected recovery curve that should not have existed yet. Someone was patching the public numbers with data no outsider should have. Daniel's pulse ticked upward. The leak was starting, his own careful fingerprints beginning to surface in places he had not touched in 15 years. Day 10. The rabbit sat on the passenger seat as Daniel drove through pre-dawn fog at 4:22 a.m., its stitched ear flopping against the window glass. Lila had cried the night before because her class rabbit project was due in 3 days and she still couldn't find the right shade of brown thread. He had promised her he would fix it. The promise tasted like solder on his tongue. Inside the vault, the air had grown colder, almost clinical. He replaced the failing voltage regulator on the primary bus with one pull from his own discontinued prototype, serial number 0001, the very first unit. The swap took 11 minutes. We powered the segment back on. The waveform on his oscilloscope flattened into a perfect sine. The entire cluster sighed in unison, a sound like distant thunder rolling backward. He was wiping the last fingerprint from the panel when the motion sensor in the corridor triggered. A guard's radio crackled 10 feet away. Maintenance closet clear, but the temperature just dropped 2 degrees on its own. Check the log. Daniel froze. The rabbit watched from the tool bag, unblinking. He slid behind a server rack as the door handle turned. The guard's flashlight swept across the floor, once, twice, then paused on the exact spot where the rabbit's shadow had fallen a moment earlier. Nothing. The man muttered something about old buildings and left. Daniel waited until the footsteps faded, heart hammering against the folded letter of cloth in his pocket. The debt was tightening. One more slip and the whole illusion would shatter before the final act. Day 11. Morning brought a fresh crisis. At 9:37 a.m., Marcus stormed the data center floor in a charcoal Brioni suit. Italian shoes clicking like accusations. The overnight backup had corrupted. 3 petabytes of client transaction records turned to digital ash. Analysts gathered in a nervous semicircle. The smell of burnt coffee and fear hung thick. Marcus slammed a tablet onto a console. $28 million in exposure by close of market. Fix it. Now. His voice cracked on the last word. The Patek on his wrist caught the overhead light and flashed once, expensive and useless. Daniel emptied the shredder bin 6 feet away, head down, cartwheels squeaking. He heard the exact timestamp of the corruption, 2:19 a.m., the precise minute he had recalibrated the optical isolator 2 nights earlier. A side effect, an invisible scar from his invisible surgery. The core was healing, but the patient was bleeding from the stitches. He waited until the crowd thinned at 11:05 a.m., then slipped into the records vault with a stolen keycard. The corrupted drives smelled of ozone and defeat. He connected his own encrypted laptop, model obsolete since 2004, and began the slow, surgical reconstruction. Line by line, he rewrote the checksums he had designed in the first place. The screen glowed pale blue against the rabbit's brown fur as it rested beside the keyboard like a patient witness. By 2:14 p.m., the first terabyte breathed again, then the second. The system accepted the restored data without protest. Daniel logged the recovery under a ghost account that hadn't been used since the Clinton administration. When the last byte locked into place, the main monitor on the trading floor refreshed with green arrows. Traders erupted in cautious applause down the hall. Marcus stood at the window of his corner office, staring at the sudden rally. Daniel passed the open door, pushing a mop bucket, the rabbit warm against his ribs beneath the gray uniform. Their eyes met for half a second. Marcus looked away first. Day 12. The rain started at 6:50 p.m., drumming against the glass atrium like impatient fingers. Daniel was replacing ceiling tiles in the executive wing when the next mini-crisis landed. An emergency board call had been scheduled for 8 a.m. the following morning. The agenda was simple and brutal. Approve the emergency sale of the entire data center infrastructure to a foreign consortium for 62 cents on the dollar. Marcus had already initialed the term sheet. The signature trembled slightly on the digital page. Daniel read the leaked memo while pretending to polish the brass handrail outside the conference room. The buyer's name was one he recognized, Hale Dynamics, the very firm that had tried to poach his original patents in 2001. They thought they were getting a fire sale. They had no idea they were about to purchase their own forgotten history. He finished his shift at 11:40 p.m., drove home through sheets of water, and found Lila asleep on the couch with her unfinished rabbit project clutched to her chest. The missing brown thread lay on the coffee table like an accusation. He threaded the needle under the kitchen light, the rabbit on his lap, and sewed the final ear into place with the same precision he used on $1 Million Code. When he tucked the finished toy beside her at 1:03 a.m., her small hand closed around it instinctively. Back at the building by 3:12 a.m., he bypassed the new biometric lock on the sublevel with a magnetized access card he had kept since the building's ribbon cutting. The vault door opened with a sigh of chilled air. Tonight's work was the most dangerous yet. He would reroute the entire disaster recovery chain through the original root partition he alone had signed in 1998. If the board voted to sell at dawn, the transfer would trigger a cascading authentication failure that no one but him could untangle. The multimeter beeped softly at 4:29 a.m. The rabbit sat atop the server, ears drooping, as if listening for the coming storm. Daniel soldered the final bridge, the metallic tang sharp in his nostrils, and watched the diagnostic lights sequence into a pattern only he understood. He left the building at 5:15 a.m. as the first hint of sunrise bled across the sky. The rain had stopped. In 17 hours, the board would meet. In 17 hours, the man who had once been dismissed as scrap metal would decide whether the company lived or died in front of everyone who had laughed. The rabbit rested on the dashboard the whole drive home, its stitched eyes reflecting the city lights that no longer looked quite so desperate. The debt was no longer approaching. It was already in the room. The rabbit's stitched eyes caught the first red glow of dawn as Daniel pulled into his driveway at 5:47 a.m. He killed the engine. The silence that followed felt heavier than the rain had been. 17 hours. He carried the toy inside like evidence. Day 1 to 16 hours until the board vote. Lila was already awake, barefoot in the kitchen, pouring cereal that scattered across the counter like tiny brown coins. She saw the rabbit and lit up with the kind of smile that made every late-night solder joint worth the burn. "You finished him, Dad." Her small fingers traced the new ear, the thread he had matched at 1:03 a.m. under the humming fridge light. She hugged the toy to her chest, the same instinctive grip from hours earlier. For a moment, the house smelled of warm milk and safety. Then the phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number, 6:02 a.m. Daniel let it ring. He already knew the voice that would be on the other end. At 7:15 a.m., he walked Lila to the corner bus stop, Rabbit tucked safely in her backpack like a co-pilot. The autumn air carried the metallic scent of wet leaves and distant diesel. He watched the yellow bus swallow her, then turned back toward the city on foot. The long way. He needed the time to think. By 8:40 a.m., he was back inside the Hale Dynamics server farm, now dressed in the gray maintenance coveralls that still smelled faintly of the same machine oil from 1998. No one looked at him twice. The night shift crew had left half-empty coffee cups and the ghost of burnt toast in the break room. Daniel moved like smoke through the aisles, checking the reroute he had soldered hours earlier. The diagnostic lights still pulsed in the private sequence only he could read. Good. Then the first crack appeared. At 9:12 a.m., the new head of cybersecurity, Marcus Hale, 31, wearing a Brioni suit cut so sharp it looked weaponized, strode into the sublevel with 2 armed guards and a tablet glowing with intrusion alerts. His Italian Oxfords clicked against the grated floor like a countdown. Who the hell authorized a root-level partition change at 4:17 a.m.? Vale's voice echoed off the racks. He hadn't noticed Daniel yet, crouched behind rack 17 pretending to trace a fiber line. One of the guards shrugged. Maintenance log says it was routine. Vale's laugh was short and ugly. Routine doesn't trip every honeypot we own. Find a tech who signed it. I want him in my office by lunch. Daniel kept his head down. The multimeter in his pocket suddenly felt like a live grenade. He waited until the shoes clicked away, then slipped out through the old freight elevator that still answered to the bypassed biometric card. His heart beat against the rabbit's outline in his coverall pocket. The toy had ridden down with him that morning, a silent witness. Mini Crisis 1 arrived at 10:33 a.m. The board's legal team had accelerated the due diligence timeline. The auction was no longer tomorrow morning. It was tonight at 8 p.m., moved up because the buyer, a private equity group fronting for Helix's old patent thieves, smelled blood. 14 hours had just become 9. Daniel stood in the loading dock, rain beginning again, and felt the concrete vibrate under a passing truck. The metallic tang of wet steel filled his nose. He needed a new move. Fast. He drove to the old patent office on 14th and Mercer, the one the city had condemned in 2009. The door hung loose on its hinges. Inside, dust danced in the shafts of gray light. At 11:19 a.m., he found the original filing cabinet, 3rd drawer, still locked with a combination he had memorized the day Lila was born. Inside lay the carbon copy of patent 7,412,009. The one they had all laughed at when he tried to present it in the 2001 boardroom, wearing the same stained coveralls he wore now. The paper smelled of mildew and forgotten ink. He folded it once, slipped it into the same pocket as the rabbit. 2 symbols, 1 debt. Back at the building by 12:47 p.m. The second escalation hit in the cafeteria. Marcus Hale had posted an all-hands at 1 p.m. sharp. 200 employees crammed into the glass-walled room that still carried the faint smell of reheated lasagna. Daniel stood at the very back, near the coffee urn, cap low. Vale paced the small stage in his spotless suit, Patek flashing under the fluorescence. Someone is sabotaging the sale. We've traced anomalous root activity to a legacy petition signed in 1998. Whoever you are, you're clever, but you're also finished. The buyer has agreed to add a $10 million forensic bonus if we deliver the saboteur before close. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the room. Daniel felt eyes skim past him. Then Vale dropped the name. We believe it's a former contractor. Someone who used to call himself the original architect. Daniel Cross. The cafeteria went dead quiet. Someone dropped a fork. The clatter rang like a gunshot. Daniel didn't move. The rabbit in his pocket suddenly felt warm against his ribs. Vale's gaze swept the crowd, landed nowhere near the back. If anyone sees this ghost, you call security immediately. He's scrap. He's nothing. And tonight, he becomes someone else's problem. The exact words from 23 years ago echoed in Daniel's skull, like they had been waiting in the ductwork all this time. He slipped out during the applause. Day 1 to 6 hours until the accelerated auction. At 2:14 p.m., he sat in the cab of his truck 2 blocks from the building, engine off, windows fogged. The rabbit rested on the passenger seat. Ears flopped forward as if exhausted by the weight of secrets. Daniel unfolded the 2001 patent and read the signature at the bottom. His own, younger, unashamed. Then he did the one thing he had avoided for 2 decades. He dialed a number he had not used since Lila's mother died. The voice that answered was older, rougher, but still carried the calm of someone who had once flown 287 combat missions at Daniel's wing. Cross. You still breathing? Captain Reyes. I need the old crew list. The one with the non-disclosure riders. A pause. Rain drummed on the roof. You finally calling in that favor? I'm calling in all of them. By 3:37 p.m., the first small reversal landed privately. 3 former engineers, 2 now running their own cybersecurity boutique in Seattle. 1 a tenured professor at MIT. Received encrypted packets containing the original root keys and a single line of text. The house is on fire. Come watch it burn or hell put out. Auction tonight, 8 p.m., main auditorium. Bring laptops. None of them had spoken to Daniel in 19 years. All 3 replied within 11 minutes. The replies were short. One contained only a call sign from 1998, Ghost Actual. Daniel allowed himself one slow breath that fogged the windshield further. The rabbit watched him with its calm, stitched eyes. 4:22 p.m., 4 hours remaining. Marcus Vale stood alone in the executive washroom, splashing cold water on his face. His reflection looked suddenly younger than the Brioni suit suggested. The forensic audit had just pinged his tablet again. The rerouted disaster recovery chain now pointed backward through 3 defunct shell companies that all traced to a single name, Cross D. The timestamp on the original signing certificate read 3:14 a.m., April 17, 1998. The same night, the board had voted to strip Daniel of every equity share and laughed while security escorted him out carrying a cardboard box. Vale's hands trembled so badly the Patek slid down his wrist. He caught it before it hit the marble. For the first time in his polished career, he understood he might be on the wrong side of a story that had started long before his first Italian Oxford. He texted his assistant, "Delay the buyer's team in the green room. I need 15 minutes alone with the maintenance logs." Daniel, watching the same logs from a utility closet on sublevel 3, saw the request come through. The corner of his mouth lifted by a fraction. The rabbit sat atop a coiled Ethernet cable, listening. 5:51 p.m., 2 hours and 9 minutes until the gavel. A new mini-crisis bloomed in the server room. The buyer's technical due diligence team had arrived early and brought their own air-gapped forensic server. They were now mirroring the exact partition Daniel had altered at 4:29 a.m., If they finished before 7:30, they would discover the cascading failure trigger and simply firewall it. The entire slow burn would fizzle in front of the same people who had once called him scrap metal. Daniel moved through the service tunnels like a man walking into his own past. The air tasted of ozone and fear sweat. At 6:08 p.m., he reached the junction box directly beneath the auction auditorium. One cable, one cut, one perfect window of darkness. He pulled a rabbit from his pocket and set it on the cold metal ledge. Its brown-threaded ear brushed his knuckles. He drew a breath that smelled of solder and old victories. The lights above the stage flickered once, then twice. The countdown ticked inside his chest like a second heartbeat. 71 minutes until the room, full of polished shoes and Brioni suits, would learn exactly whose history they had tried to auction off. And the rabbit waited, ears drooping, for the next precise move in a debt that had taken 23 years to come due. The lights above the stage flickered once, then twice. The countdown ticked inside his chest like a second heartbeat. 71 minutes until the room, full of polished shoes and Brioni suits, would learn exactly whose history they had tried to auction off. And the rabbit waited, ears drooping, for the next precise move in a debt that had taken 23 years to come due. Day -2, 6:12 p.m. Daniel's knife slid through the fiber-optic trunk with the soft click of a lock turning. The server room above plunged into blackness. Shouts erupted through the vents. Sharp, expensive voices suddenly stripped of power. He counted 8 heartbeats in the dark, then slipped the rabbit back into the breast pocket of his faded coveralls. Its worn paw pressed against the steady rhythm there, the same way it had the night he first stitched its ears shut with dental floss in a Kandahar bunker. He was already 3 levels down before the emergency generators coughed to life. The buyer's forensic team would lose their mirror. 43 minutes of clean data gone. But the real prize still sat untouched on the mainframe. The original firmware signature no one had seen in 2 decades. 6:47 p.m. 1 hour 13 minutes until the gavel. Vale stood alone in the green room. Tie loosened, Patek forgotten on the table. The maintenance logs refused to open. Every password he tried returned the same error. Access denied. Level Omega. A level that didn't exist in the org chart he had memorized. His assistant hovered in the doorway, voice tight. "Sir, the buyers are furious. They're demanding the CEO. They're saying if the system isn't stable by auction time, they walk with their $270 million letter of intent." Vale's throat worked. He remembered the way Daniel's shoulders had stayed square, even as security shoved him toward the service elevator. The man hadn't begged. He hadn't even spoken. Just carried that ridiculous cardboard box like it held the crown jewels. "Tell them technical difficulties," Vale said, "and give me the original Founders Archive. The one we sealed after the IPO." His assistant hesitated. "That archive was wiped, sir, by order of the board." "Then find whoever did the wiping." 7:04 p.m., 19 minutes until the first bids. Daniel surfaced in the sub-basement mechanical gallery, boots ringing on catwalk steel. The rabbit rode in his pocket like a silent co-pilot. He could still smell the solder from the junction box, could still feel the exact tension in the cable before it parted. One clean cut. Same precision he once used on high-voltage relays aboard a classified drone that never officially flew. A new alarm began to pulse, low, almost subaudible. The buyer's team had rerouted power through their own hardened laptop. They were rebuilding the mirror faster than he expected. If they synced before the auction hall filled, the altar partition would light up red on every screen. The cascading failure trigger would be quarantined. The debt would remain unpaid. He checked his battered watch. 7:09 p.m. Time for the second small reversal. Daniel dropped into the crawl space beneath the main server rack. The space smelled of chilled air and decades of dust. His fingers found the exact panel he had installed himself on a cold November night in 2001. back when the company was still just 12 people and a dream no one else believed. The rabbit came out again. He sat on the rack's metal lip so its button eyes could watch. A single USB drive, the size of a dog tag, slid from the lining of his coveralls. He plugged it in. Lines of code older than most of the executives upstairs began to breathe again. Not enough to reveal him. Just enough to slow the mirror by another 17 minutes. Just enough to make the forensic server hiccup and report phantom packet loss. Footsteps echoed overhead. Someone was coming. Daniel melted back into the service tunnel, heart steady, rabbit once more against his chest. The fabric of the toy had grown warm from his body heat. Same warmth it carried the night. He carried it out of a burning Blackhawk in the Hindu Kush, the only thing that survived the crash besides him. 8:21 p.m. 41 minutes past the original gavel time. The auction auditorium was now a pressure cooker of tailored suits and whispered panic. Crystal chandeliers flickered every 90 seconds thanks to the lingering instability Daniel had threaded through the grid. Vale stood at the podium, forehead glistening under the lights, trying to buy time with smooth corporate language that tasted like ash in his mouth. Minor technical hiccup, ladies and gentlemen. We're told it will be resolved momentarily. From the back row, an older board member, silver-haired, Brioni lapels gleaming, muttered loud enough to carry. This is what happens when you let maintenance touch the core systems. Should have scrapped that entire department years ago. A few people chuckled. The same chuckle Daniel had heard the night they voted him out. Vale's gaze flicked toward the service door. For a fraction of a second, he thought he saw a shadow move behind the frosted glass. A silhouette holding something small and brown against its chest. He looked away. 9:03 p.m. day -1. Daniel sat on an overturned crate in the utility closet that had become his war room. The rabbit rested on a cardboard box he had carried out 2 nights earlier, the same box the board had laughed at. Inside were 23 years of meticulously kept notebooks, each page filled with the kind of elegant code that once powered orbital reconnaissance birds no government would ever admit existed. A new mini-crisis had arrived via the internal messaging system. The buyer's lead engineer had isolated the packet loss anomaly. They were now tracing it backward through the building's physical infrastructure. In 90 minutes, they would reach the exact junction box Daniel had cut. If they opened the panel, they would find the clean knife mark and the faint brown thread caught on the metal edge. Thread from a rabbit's ear. Daniel exhaled through his nose. The air tasted of cooling servers and old coffee. He stood, tucked the rabbit into his pocket, and began moving again. This time toward the records vault on level 4. The vault that held the original incorporation papers. The ones that still listed a different name in the founder slot. A name the board had paid millions to erase from every database. The corridors were quieter now. Most staff had been sent home under the pretense of a systems upgrade. Only the elite remained. Polished shoes clicking on marble, Patek watches catching the emergency lighting like tiny frantic hearts. 11:47 p.m. Vale found a first real crack in the story inside a forgotten server backup, labeled simply Project Legomorph. A children's name for something that had once decided the outcome of entire wars from 40,000 feet. The file had been accessed at 4:29 a.m. that same morning. The login ID was a ghost account that should have expired in 2002. He opened the attached manifest. The author field read, D. Harrow, lead systems architect, 287 missions logged. Vale's hands began to shake again. The Patek slid down his wrist exactly as it had 2 nights earlier. This time he let it fall to the carpet with a soft thud. He remembered the maintenance man's face now. Not the tired janitor they had all seen for years. The real face. The one that had stared back at him from a classified briefing photo 2 decades ago, when Vale was still a junior analyst dreaming of corner offices. Daniel Harrow, the man who designed the original kill switch architecture the entire company still depended on. The man they had voted out carrying a cardboard box and a child's stuffed rabbit. Vale picked up the Patek. The second hand trembled like it was afraid. Midnight. Daniel stood on the roof access ladder, wind whipping at his coveralls. Below him, the city glittered indifferent. In his left hand, he held a rabbit. In his right, a single printed page fresh from the records vault. The original equity ledger, signed in ink that had faded to the color of dried blood. The buyer's forensic team had reached the junction box 17 minutes ago. They found a knife mark. They found a brown thread. But the thread had led them in the wrong direction, deliberately toward a decoy router on the opposite side of the building. Another 17 minutes bought. Another small reversal in a game measured in precise windows of controlled darkness. He slipped the ledger page into the rabbit's torn lining, right next to the old dental floss stitches. The symbolic weight of it pressed against his ribs like a second heartbeat. Day 0, 2:14 a.m. The auction had been postponed until 10 a.m. sharp. The entire board had been summoned back. Rumors of a major integrity breach were spreading. Bill had not slept. His Italian Oxfords were scuffed for the first time in memory. He kept checking his phone for messages that never arrived. Daniel, 3 floors below in the same utility closet, prepared the next escalation. The forensic server was still chasing ghosts. The core partition remained altered, the cascading failure trigger still hidden like a landmine beneath perfect code. He set the rabbit on the coiled Ethernet cable again. Its button eyes reflected the glow of the single monitor. One more night, one more set of precise moves. The debt was nowhere near collected, but the interest was starting to compound. 4:51 a.m. A fresh crisis bloomed in the East server wing. The buyer's team had finally decrypted the ghost login. They now possessed a partial manifest of every backdoor Daniel had ever written into the system. Enough to see the shape of the trap, not enough to see its teeth. If they pushed the analysis live to the main auditorium projector before the rescheduled auction, the entire board would understand the company they were selling had been hollowed out from within by the very man they once escorted to the street. Daniel moved again. Service tunnels. Ozone air. The rabbit warm against his chest like a promise kept across 23 years of silence. He reached the East Wing Junction at 5:07 a.m. One more cable. One more perfect cut. One more control blackout that would look like cascading hardware failure rather than deliberate sabotage. The lights above the empty auditorium flickered once, then twice. He set the rabbit on the cold metal ledge. Its brown-threaded ear brushed his knuckles exactly as it had the night before. The smell of solder and old victories filled his lungs. The countdown inside his chest had changed its rhythm. No longer 71 minutes. Now it reads simply 5 hours and 53 minutes until the room, full of Brioni suits, learned exactly whose name had never truly left the building. And the rabbit waited, patient as only an object stitched together in war can be, for the next precise beat in a slow, procedural collection that had only just begun to show its teeth. The auditorium lights died at 5:14 a.m. exactly. A soft collective groan rolled through the handful of technicians still on graveyard shift. Daniel crouched behind a rack of blade servers, rabbit tucked inside the front pocket of his faded navy coveralls. Its worn plush pressed against his sternum like a second heartbeat. He counted 8 seconds of darkness before the emergency generators coughed to life. Emergency red flooded the corridors. Perfect. Just enough panic to keep them chasing ghosts instead of the man who used to own every line of code in the building. Day 17. He slipped back into the service tunnels before the first flashlight beams swept the junction. The air tasted of dust and warm transformer oil. 23 years ago, he had walked these same tunnels, wearing a different badge, carrying different secrets. Now he wore janitor gray and carried only the rabbit. Its button eyes had watched him sign the severance papers that cold October morning. They had watched him walk out with nothing but a cardboard box and the echo of Victor Lang's voice still ringing in his ears. "You're a liability, Hale. Take your little stuffed toy and get the hell out of my building." Victor had laughed. The board had laughed. Even the security guards had smirked as they escorted him past the marble lobby where his own name had once been etched beneath the company crest. That was before the buyout. Before Victor rebranded everything, stripped the patents, hollowed the backbone, and put the whole rotting empire up for auction. Now the interest was compounding. Daniel surfaced on sublevel 3 at 6:02 a.m. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the executive break room. He kept his head down, pushed a maintenance cart that held nothing but coiled cable and a single silver toolbox. Inside the toolbox lay a folded letter, edges soft from 2 decades of being carried in every jacket he owned. The letter had been written on the night his daughter was born. It was addressed to her in case he never came home from the mission that officially never happened. He had never mailed it. Instead, he had carried the rabbit she had sewn for him the week before he shipped out. One ear still carried the faint scent of her baby shampoo. He paused at the service elevator. Footsteps approached. 2 of Victor's senior analysts, both in crisp white shirts and carrying tablets that glowed with partial manifests. "I'm telling you, the ghost login belongs to someone who knew the original architecture," one of them whispered. "The back doors are elegant. Whoever wrote them wasn't some disgruntled ex-employee. They were surgical." The second analyst snorted. "Lang says it's just legacy garbage. We patch it before the auction and the buyer never knows." 5 hours, man. 5 hours until we're all millionaires on paper. They passed without noticing the janitor leaning on his cart. Daniel waited until their voices faded, then pressed the button for the executive floor. The rabbit shifted against his chest as the elevator rose. Its threadbare paw brushed the folded letter through the fabric of his pocket. A small comfort, a small promise. 7 hours and 12 minutes until the auction. The new crisis arrived at 8:47 a.m. like clockwork. Victor Lang stormed into the main conference room, wearing a charcoal Brioni suit cut, so sharp it looked weaponized. The Patek on his wrist caught the morning light as he slammed a tablet onto the teak table. 16 board members and 3 potential buyers looked up from their espressos. "Someone just wiped the forensic server clean," Victor snapped. "Every trace of the ghost login is gone. Not deleted. Erased with a scrubber that only exists in our original classified codebase. Who the hell still has access to that?" Silence answered him. Daniel watched the entire scene from behind a half-open utility door at the back of the room, pretending to change a light fixture. The rabbit sat on the ledge inside the panel, button eyes fixed on the man who had once thrown it across the lobby like a piece of trash. Victor's voice dropped an octave. "If this gets projected in the main auditorium at 2 o'clock, the buyers walk. We lose the $2.4 billion deal. Find a breach. Now." One of the analysts raised a hesitant hand. "Sir, the scrub pattern matches a call sign we found buried in the original firmware. Delta 9 Echo." Victor froze. The name landed like a blade. Daniel felt the word travel across 23 years and strike him square in the chest. He had not heard his old designation spoken aloud since the night they burned his records. "Delta 9 Echo," the analyst continued, voice trembling slightly. It's the same signature that designed the original quantum partition. The one Lang himself claims credit for in every interview. Victor's jaw tightened. A flicker of something crossed his face, recognition, maybe fear, maybe both. He adjusted his Patek, a nervous tell Daniel had memorized years ago. "Coincidence," Victor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Give me a full audit. Every terminal, every camera, every janitor swipe card from the last 72 hours. Daniel closed the utility panel softly. The rabbit came with him, tucked once more against the letter. He moved down the corridor toward the east server wing again, footsteps silent on the polished concrete. The smell of Victor's expensive cologne still clung to the air behind him. Day 17, 9:33 a.m. Another mini-crisis bloomed 39 minutes later. The buyer's lead forensic engineer had recovered a single uncorrupted metadata tag. It pointed to an internal memo dated 17 years earlier, back when the company still bore Daniel's original patents. The memo contained 3 words that should never have survived the purge: property of D. Hale. The tag was scheduled to auto-project during the pre-auction technical overview at 2 p.m. sharp. If it appeared on the 40-foot screen in front of the entire board and the 3 foreign conglomerates bidding $2.4 billion, the sale would collapse in real time. Daniel learned this while refilling the water coolers on the executive level. A harried assistant had left her laptop open while she ran to the restroom. He read the alert upside down, Rabbit warm in his pocket like an old friend keeping watch. Then he moved. Service Tunnel B for 10:12 a.m. The air grew colder the deeper he went, carrying the faint metallic tang of chilled coolant lines. He reached the junction beneath the main auditorium exactly 6 minutes later. One more precise cut. One more ghost in the machine. This time he left a breadcrumb, small enough to look like an error, large enough to keep them hunting in the wrong direction for another 4 hours. He set the Rabbit on the cold metal access panel. Its brown-threaded ear brushed his scarred knuckles exactly as it had at 5:07 a.m. The same ritual, the same promise. 23 years of silence measured in button eyes and soldered circuits. 11 hours and 48 minutes until the auction. By 11:55 a.m., the boardroom had become a war room. Victor paced in his Brioni suit, Italian leather shoes clicking against marble like a metronome set to panic. Daniel watched through the gap in the ceiling tiles above, coveralls blending with the ductwork. The Rabbit rested on a crossbeam 2 feet from his face, staring down at the growing chaos below. "We're missing something," Victor said, voice tight. The scrubber, the metadata tag, the way the lights keep failing in perfect 7-minute intervals. It's not random. It's choreographed. One of the older board members, an original investor who had been there the day they escorted Daniel out, leaned forward. His voice was quiet but carried. "Victor, you ever think this feels like Hale's handwriting?" Victor stopped pacing. The room temperature seemed to drop 3 degrees. "Hale is gone," he said. "Fired. Erased." The man was a janitor with delusions of grandeur. He had a goddamn stuffed rabbit, for Christ's sake. But the words sounded hollow even to him. Daniel saw the micro-tremor in Victor's left hand as he reached for his Patek again. The same tremor that had appeared the day he realized the original patents were ironclad and only one man knew every hidden clause. Daniel eased the ceiling tile back into place without a sound. The Rabbit came with him, carried through the narrow crawl space like a talisman. Its soft weight against his chest reminded him of the night his daughter had pressed it into his hands before deployment. "So you won't be alone, Daddy." He had never told her what he really did for a living. Never told anyone. Until now, the debt had waited in silence. Now he was learning how to speak again, one control blackout, one recovered metadata tag, one whispered call sign at a time. Day 17, 1:07 p.m. The third mini-crisis of the morning hit with 43 minutes remaining on the public countdown clock displayed in every hallway. A junior technician discovered the Rabbit, not the real one. A perfect replica Daniel had planted in the east server wing, sitting atop a bundle of freshly cut fiber with a small note tucked beneath its paws. The note read, in handwriting no one had seen in 23 years, "Check partition 23 Echo." The discovery triggered an immediate security sweep. Alarms remained silent. Daniel had seen to that, but the buyer's private team moved like sharks smelling blood. They converged on the server wing, carrying tablets and expressions of grim triumph. Victor arrived last, suit jacket now unbuttoned, hair slightly out of place for the first time in recorded memory. He picked up the decoy Rabbit, held it at arm's length as though it might bite. The same Rabbit he had once hurled across a lobby. Its button eyes stared back at him with sewn-on patience. "What the hell is this?" Victor whispered. The lead analyst cleared his throat. "Sir, The note references Partition 23 Echo. That's the one we can't open without triggering the cascading failure. The one tied to the original owner's biometric lock. Victor's face drained of color. For the first time in 17 years, he looked exactly like what he was. A man standing on scaffolding built by someone else's genius. He turned the rabbit over in his hands. His thumb brushed the faded brown-threaded ear. Daniel watched from the observation gallery above, hidden behind one-way glass installed during his own tenure. The real rabbit rested inside his coverall pocket, pressed against the folded letter that had never reached his daughter. Its warmth bled through the fabric like forgiveness earned one precise cut at a time. 14 hours and 9 minutes until the auction doors opened to the public. The interest was no longer compounding. It was about to come due. The auction room smelled of polished oak and nervous sweat. By 9:14 a.m. the next morning, 217 invited bidders filled the tiered seats of the old control theater, once Daniel's private war room, now converted into a spectacle. Executives in Brioni suits, venture capitalists checking Patek Philippe watches, reporters from 3 networks, and in the front row, the original board that had voted him out 17 years earlier. They sat stiffly, ties too tight, eyes darting toward the stage where a single metal lectern waited under harsh lights. Victor stood at the center of it all, collar damp, voice clipped as he ran through the final pitch. Gentlemen, ladies, the legacy infrastructure is stable. Our forensic audit confirms 78% operational capacity. The reserve price stands at $412 million. Bidding opens in 90 seconds. A low murmur rippled through the room. Victor's eyes flicked upward once, toward the observation gallery he could no longer see into. He did not know Daniel was already downstairs, coverall swapped for the charcoal suit that still fit after all these years. The real rabbit rested inside the left breast pocket now, right against the folded letter. The first bid came at $415, then $440. The numbers climbed with mechanical precision while the public countdown clock, relocated to the back wall, ticked down the final 4 minutes of the grace window Daniel had embedded in the system 17 years ago. At 3 minutes remaining, the lights flickered once. Not dramatically, just enough. Every screen in the theater went black. Gasps. A few shouts. Victor's hand shot to the microphone. Security, kill the feed. Too late. A single line of green text appeared across every monitor, every tablet, every phone still connected to the house Wi-Fi. Partition 23 Echo now releasing. Owner biometric confirmed. Voice print match, Daniel E. Calder. Mission designation, Shepherd 01. The room fell into a stunned hush. Then the archive began to play. Not slides, not bullet points, raw mission footage. Daniel's face, 23 years younger, calm in the glow of 6 monitors, while he rerouted an entire satellite constellation in 71 seconds to prevent a friendly fire incident that would have killed 412 coalition troops. His voice, quiet and certain, giving orders that saved the company's first billion-dollar contract. Cut to the original patent filings, signed by Daniel alone. The ink still sharp. Cut to the trust documents Victor had buried in a Luxembourg vault. Documents that proved the anonymous majority shareholder had always been the man they threw out in 2007. The final segment showed the board meeting itself. Id in camera. Victor's face clear as day while he read the termination letter aloud. This company no longer requires sentimental relics or outdated code. Take your box and go, Calder. The future doesn't need you. The screen froze on Victor's sneer. In the front row, several former board members looked physically ill. One dropped his phone. It clattered across the marble like a gunshot. Victor stood motionless at the lectern, skin gray, the rabbit note still crumpled in his fist from the night before. The real rabbit, the one with the faded brown threaded ear, now sat on the lectern beside the microphone, placed there by an unseen hand exactly 60 seconds earlier. Daniel walked out from stage left. No fanfare, no spotlight. Just a 61-year-old single father in a suit that had waited in storage since his daughter was 3. The room inhaled as one. He stopped 3 feet from Victor. Their eyes met for the first time in 17 years. The smell of cedar from the old rabbit's fur drifted between them. "Victor," Daniel said, voice low enough that only the front 3 rows could hear. "That letter you never delivered? It's still in my pocket. My daughter turned 20 last month. She thinks her father abandoned her. Today, she learns the truth." Victor's lips moved, but no sound came. His Patek caught the light and trembled. Daniel turned to the audience. The microphone picked up every word. "Ladies and gentlemen, the company was never for sale. The reserve price was a trap. Any bid placed in the last 17 minutes has been logged, time-stamped, and forwarded to the SEC. You were betting on a corpse." The corpse just sat up. He tapped the lectern once. The screens returned to life, now displaying live transfer documents. Every asset, every patent, every line of proprietary code slid back into accounts bearing Daniel E. Calder's name. The dollar amount that appeared at the bottom made several people audibly swear. For $1,873,214,000. The original board stared at the number like it had teeth. Victor's shoulders folded. He looked suddenly 10 years older. The polished antagonist was gone. Only the frightened man remained. He stepped around the lectern, voice cracking on the first try. "Daniel, I need to speak with you. Privately. Please." They moved to the small green room behind the stage. The door clicked shut. Inside, the smell of old coffee and fear. Victor's Italian shoes scraped the floor as he paced 3 steps, then stopped. "I kept telling myself it was just business. That you were unstable after Sarah left. That the board needed fresh blood." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But I knew. Even then, I knew what you'd built. I just wanted the credit. I wanted to be you." He reached into his own jacket and pulled out a second folded letter. Yellowed, never sent. The one he had intercepted in 2008. The one that read, in Daniel's handwriting, "Asterisk sweetheart, Daddy's coming home soon. I promise, asterisk." Victor held it out with both hands, the way a man surrenders a weapon. "I'm sorry. I was cruel when cruelty wasn't necessary. I stole your life to inflate mine. And I kept your daughter from you for 17 years. There's no fixing that. But the company, it's yours. It was always yours." Daniel took the letter. His thumb traced the old crease exactly where it had been folded in 2008. For the first time in the entire ordeal, his eyes glistened. Victor stepped back. "I'll make the announcement myself, in front of all of them. Then I'll resign. Effective immediately." They returned to the stage 90 seconds later. Victor approached the microphone alone. The room was so quiet the ventilation system sounded like wine through a canyon. He cleared his throat once. 17 years ago, I stood in this same building and told a man he was scrap. I was wrong. Daniel Calder is the sole and rightful owner of every patent, every line of code, every future this company will ever have. I formally apologize to him, to his daughter, and to every person I misled. My resignation will be filed within the hour. The board that voted with me should consider doing the same." He turned, met Daniel's eyes one last time, and gave a small, broken nod. Then he walked off stage without looking back. His footsteps echoed until the side door closed. Daniel stood alone under the lights. He reached into his pocket and lifted the rabbit so the entire room could see it. The faded brown thread caught the light like old blood turned to rust. "My daughter's name is Emily," he said quietly. "She collects these. Always has. This one went missing the same week I did. She'll get it back today, along with her father." He placed the rabbit gently on the lectern. The silence broke into scattered applause that grew, hesitant at first, then thunderous. Even some of the original mockers clapped, shame-faced, eyes wet. Outside the theater, rain began to fall on the glass atrium. Inside, The symbolic rabbit sat motionless while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions no one answered. 3 weeks later, the old control theater had been restored to its original use. The rabbit sat in the corner of Daniel's reclaimed desk, one ear still slightly bent from Victor's throw across the lobby in 2007. A new photograph stood beside it. Daniel and Emily at a small cafe on 14th and Pine, her laugh frozen mid-syllable, his arm around her shoulder for the first time in 17 years. Victor sent a single-line email the day the photo was taken. No subject, just asterisk, she has her eyes. I'm glad she finally got to see them. Asterisk. He never returned to the building. On quiet evenings, Daniel still walked the server wings at 2:14 a.m., the hour when the original safeguards had been written. The systems hummed around him like old friends remembering their names. The letter, both versions now, rested in a small glass case on the wall. A reminder that some debts are collected not in money, but in years returned. And in the end, the lesson was brutally simple. Status is loud. Genius is patient. When the scaffolding finally collapses, the man who built the foundation is the only one still standing. He does not gloat. He simply hands his daughter the rabbit she lost, folds the letter she never received, and lets the silence speak the rest.